For my project, I compared and analyzed first-hand accounts of the Korean War with historical perspectives of the Korean War. Was the Korean War simply a part of the Cold War or a civil war? The historian William Stueck begins his history with a contrast of American-supported Japanese officials in South Korea and Soviet-supported anti-imperialist Korean officials in North Korea. As you know, Kyung-Moon Hwang begins his history focusing on the unsavory behavior of the Korean nationalists in South Korea, with Syngman Rhee and Kim Koo pushing out moderates and left-leaning politicians and incarcerating and killing leftist activists in South, and Kim Il-sung in the North consolidating his power and eliminating his political opponents. However, contrary to these popular histories, first-hand accounts of Korea describe an ideological struggle that only the minority were invested in. Young Bok-yu, a North Korean POW, relates, "I realized that upperclassmen were communist sympathizers. At first, they tried to persuade students to join of their own accord, but persuasion gradually became forced conscription. While the degree of ideological conviction varied by region, many Koreans weren't invested in the war effort." Chung Dong-kyu, a North Korean victim of the communist education system, related, "I had no opinions about the war, nor even about the communist system. I related Marxist-Leninist doctrine because everyone to whom I had been exposed in school recited Marxist-Leninist doctrine. I was obedient. I supported the war effort because my country was at war. But I never thought about any of it. Thinking about events around me was not something that had ever occurred to me to do." For Koreans, the legacy of the Korean War was a people divided. That is what people most commonly write about. That is what their accounts focus on. Park Jong-young was a South Korean high school student, and his father was an important government official, and at the risk of death, they both fled to Pusan. Additionally, males as young as 14 were forced into the North Korean army, causing many families to be separated throughout the course of the war, and not just because of political boundaries. The Civil War is often erroneously assumed to be a divided people rising up against themselves, an ideological or political divide which cannot be reconciled, a revolutionary attempt to establish justice. In reality, civil war rarely has the popular support that is so readily assumed. Most people want peace, but war is forced upon them by dissatisfied minorities. The Korean War did not begin in the hearts of the people, but rather was a war for the hearts of the people. It's the devastation and loss that followed that make the Korean War a tragedy.